Welcome back to the Beit Midrash, everyone. Good to have you back. Good to be back after the high holidays. Um, Moedim L'Simcha, in the midst of Sukkot and Chol HaMoed Sukkot. And good to be learning together again in the middle of the holiday. So we're coming up towards the end of To Be a Jew Today by Noah Feldman. We're on part 3, chapter 3. Um, he ominously calls it the marriage plot, but I'm not sure it's so much a plot as just, I'm not sure he describes a plot in there, but nonetheless, um, about marriage, interfaith marriage, along those lines and questions. So, um, as usual, let's open it up first. Any opening thoughts, comments, questions um, about the chapter?
Not about the chapter, but I've wondered if there's been discussion of not just Jewish, non-Jewish, but he morphed over in his discussion to same-sex marriage. Is
Um, he talks about same-sex marriage a little bit in this chapter.
mhm.
Um, and as he points out, in some ways that ends up being an, at least for progressives and even to some extent evolutionists, that ends up being almost an easier conversation than the
Yeah.
interfaith question. Um, as long as the same-sex couple is both Jewish. Yes, Esther. And then Diane. I saw Esther and then I saw you, Diane. So
Hold on a second. I'm trying to get back to this this Zoom. Um, I feel like we've lived this this story, this sort of evolution, this intermarriage evolution. And the thing that that always, I guess, surprises me is just how much things change and how you wonder if there are any rules, because the rules are constantly changing and evolving and based on the needs of the community. I mean, I lived this evolution and suffered from this evolution. The world is a completely different place from when I got married 41 years ago. So, it was just kind of, it's perplexing to me.
what part is perplexing?
Um, this book started out with all these descriptions of types of Jews, and I really loved that. And I think what I love the most about this book is that there is no bad Jew, and no matter what we believe and no matter how we believe, it's okay. And it's not only okay, it's good, and it's to be supported. So, I guess what continues to be perplexing then you know, is being a Jew anything? What about the Jews for Jesus? What about, is everything okay? I happen to go to a bunch of different services this holiday, and one service was at a very traditional conservative synagogue that had a 4-piece band on Yom Kippur and did an amazing service. I went to another synagogue over Rosh Hashanah that didn't have any bands. The service was completely in Hebrew and very traditional, with a lot of yada yadas and naguns. And I was checked in on an iPad, and the people there were in jeans and all sorts of genders and and unions, and who knows who was there, old, young, all kinds of people. So it's all very confusing. Nobody fits into any category per se. So I guess is Judaism simply what we make it? And maybe that's okay.
So it's funny because I know I'm assuming you mostly went to places in DC. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's funny because I can reasonably guess from your description which synagogues you went to from
go
that.
for it.
Um, and well, that's not the relevant part, but knowing if I'm correct in which synagogues I think you went to, I can easily tell you why they made the decisions they did. And so I think that's part of what he's trying to make the argument of is that for some people, yes, Judaism is what you make it. Um, and that's kind of a progressive cultural Jewish frame, is that the ritual, the law doesn't have a firm, doesn't really necessarily speak to who we are and what we do, so we'll just make it what we want to make it. That's kind of a progressive or cultural viewpoint. Traditionalists, and if you had gone to a traditionalist synagogue, would have been a very different viewpoint and a very different service. Um,
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting because I think what you're describing is also somewhat what um, the accusation that traditionalists often lobby against progressive and evolutionist Jews is whatever you're just forming the halacha into whatever you want it to be, and that's not how it works. You can't just decide what you want to keep and what you don't want to keep. It's halacha. It's tradition. You can't just change it. Um, and I think the other groups argue, well, you kind of can if you you kind of can under certain circumstances. And I think the progressives and the evolutionists disagree on what those circumstances are. Um, does that mean it's going to that it's whatever we really want choose it to be? I think yes and no. I think as a people and as institutions and um, as movements and as groups, no, it's not just going to be whatever we want it to be. I think as individuals, that's kind of where I think he's ending up, or where it feels like he's ending up a little bit, is that as individuals, we kind of pick how we're going to observe, and that's okay. Um, but that's not how the system of halakha works necessarily. That's kind of what the lived experience of individual Jews looks like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it feels like to me, and it's confusing. I mean, I did last year go to a conservative, straight on conservative synagogue, which was very traditional. Um, and there just are so many different options here, and I'm glad there are options. I'm glad there are options, but uh, it feels also a little desperate.
Desperate because
It feels like there are options because, well, in the same way that this book, we're going to count anybody. And I'm okay with that. I'm really okay with that. But is this a result of feeling like we need as many Jews as we can? We have to be as inclusive as we can because we're losing ground? Or is this because we really do welcome everybody? And for me, the line is the Jews for Jesus. So how does that line get drawn? Um, I don't want to monopolize here. It was just very interesting to me to see it played out in such a diverse way in front of my face, so to speak. And to go, okay, I'm in a very conservative synagogue here, and there's a four-piece band, and then I'm in this very loosey-goosey, way out there liberal synagogue meeting in a church, and the services are too traditional for me. I mean,
Um, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on those particular services, but let's see what else other people want to chime in with. Diane, you had your hand up before.
Yeah, okay, yeah, so I know this chapter was really helping us to figure out about intermarriage. But I have always felt that even when two people who were, quote, born Jewish and raised Jewish, theirs is often also an
right.
intermarriage where
Mhm.
they both came from conservative. One keeps kosher, the other one doesn't. We have in our synagogue on the high holidays, we have people whose children were raised at Temple Emmanuel, but one spouse comes to services at Temple Bethel. So within the community of Jewish people, there is still a huge diversity. And what it occurred to me, I've wondered about this before, but it occurred to me particularly when I read this chapter. It seems almost as if it is easier for a couple if they were either converted to Judaism at the same time or belonged to the same synagogue in the same community as they were growing up so that they shared those same values from the lessons in the community that they were in. So that's a complexity that we don't really address, but I think it's kind of real. And I mean, so Howard knew when we got married that I wanted to keep kosher, and he was raised in a home that was not a kosher home. And he was all into, okay, we'll keep kosher. But came the first Pesach, and I said, now we got to buy all these other dishes and other products. He was like, whoa, I thought we were already kosher. What is this? And I just think back to that time where it was an adjustment and it was a lesson for both of us. So I think there are always people around us who are different, but I think within the Jewish community, there have always been huge differences, and there may well always be. We're not a monolith. And so I just wonder, as a rabbi, your experience in, I mean, I used to have young women say to me, I converted because his family insisted I converted. And I learned all these beautiful things like celebrating Shabbat and having, various observances, and they don't do any of that. What was the point?
Um, I have a lot of responses to that. Um, Not least of which is, in my previous congregation, there was a number. I, I won't give a percentage because I'm not quite sure what the percentage would be, but there were enough members who, if you said, why are you members at this synagogue? They would say, well, I grew up Orthodox and my partner grew up Reform, my spouse grew up Reform, so this was our compromised place. Um, I've seen that somewhat less here, but it was not infrequent in Savannah where, and I've heard that elsewhere too, where people say, like I grew up one way, my partner grew up the other way, so this was like in the middle, so we compromised and came here. Um, yes, there is a diversity, and I think couples learn to navigate that diversity amongst themselves, um, hopefully with the help of a rabbi, but not always. Sometimes they just figure it out on their own. Um, and that's okay too. Yes, Joshua.
I was going to say that in some ways, I'm going to talk for a little bit and see if you like visibly cringe, but I find like the topic of marriage in some sense kind of uninteresting in this case. Like, I think the deeper question is who counts as Jewish. And I guess the thing that you might cringe about, or at least hopefully clarify, is what are the religious implications of whether your marriage is recognized as Jewish? Because right now, halachic Jews, there are two paths to being Jewish. Your mother can be halakhically Jewish, or you can convert in a way that a movement recognizes. It's frowned upon to not have a Jewish marriage that your institution recognizes, but it doesn't actually impact whether the kids are Jewish. So in some ways, it doesn't, other than like what you have to do to get divorced. If they don't recognize that you're married, you don't need a religious divorce. But in some sense, to me, it doesn't matter. If you want your group to recognize your marriage religiously, then you need to do it according to their rules. If you want the state to recognize your marriage, who cares? If the religious part's not important to you, then the tax implications and everything follow from the civil thing. If the religious part is important to you, then why do you want to fight with your religion about what they recognize?
I
So
mean,
that's sort of where I go. And I think to Esther's point, it's frustrating and kind of bewildering that there are so many people who don't even agree on what being Jewish is. Like, if you're Catholic, the Catholics all recognize you're Catholic, and they're the same, I think, variety of Catholics who will only pray in Latin, and Catholics who will pray with a band, and Catholics who will have rock bands, and Catholics who at least accept people of all rainbow colors. But they'll all agree that you're Catholic unless you've officially been thrown out of being Catholic, as long as you were baptized Catholic. And Judaism doesn't really have that. Like, some sects will, or groups will recognize you and some won't. And that's to me where the bigger thing is. It's the matter of who's going to recognize you as being Jewish. And if you're Jewish, if the Hasidim recognize you as Jewish, but you're using an iPad on Yom Tov and playing with a rock band, they're still not going to say you're not Jewish. They're going to say, like, we wish you wouldn't do that, or don't do that near us. But they won't say you're not Jewish.
I mean, I think they'll be a little harsher than that, but yes.
Yeah, but
Um,
you know what I mean. They
but
won't, they
yes.
won't cast you out of being Jewish. They'll say you're seriously misguided. Please stay far away from us and don't influence our children.
Yes. Cindy?
One quick thing, there's actually a book by Deborah Darvik, whose grandfather was Abe Berkowitz from Birmingham, and it's about two Jews can still be a mixed marriage. And if anybody's interested in that book, I do have it. The other thing is, I'm not sure that what he's talking about is so much about the rules of who counts as a Jew, but how, I guess, how it impacts each one of us individually. And how does that feel, which has nothing to do with the rules, which I think is what makes it an issue. I'm not sure that I like how he treated it in this chapter, but I think he did from time to time hit on that, like, that emotional, illogical thing. Okay, somebody said, your kid says, well, so why do I have to marry a Jew? And I mean, I don't know that he gave, in my opinion, I don't know that he gave a good answer. And then the other thing, and I guess this goes together about why there's so much diversity within Judaism. And I don't think that it's just like a Jewish problem. I think that perhaps in some ways it's a societal problem now, where people are searching for meaning in their lives, and that people are hopefully more thoughtful and planful about what they do with their spiritual life. And that's perhaps why we are having some of this diversity, like you were talking about, Esther. I mean, I don't know that that it's about the rules. It's about emotional and irrational kind of things, because to me, religion is not rational. Falling in love is not rational. And so we're dealing with these these heartfelt things. And I think this is just the result of wrestling in that way.
And I also think he's not trying to describe the rules. He's trying to describe broadly the individual experiences of people who believe in certain ways and who fall into some categories. Categories are always going to be hard to do because there's always going to be exceptions to the categories. But in some way, especially if you're writing a book, you have to do something. You can't write a book based on the lived experience of every single Jew. It'll be a 14 million volume set that is going to be too hard to wade through. But I do think, I'm not sure I was thrilled with the way he actually answered or dealt with the question in this chapter, but because I think he ended up dodging the actual question. But I do think he's trying to give kind of a lived experience, and he kind of hints that it's partially his lived experience as well of living with and wrestling with the question that's out there. Yes, Barbara Ayland.
I'm going to say that I really liked the way he dealt with this, at least the part that pertained to me. I felt really validated when he put into words the idea that, it's just a taboo. If, especially if you're not really believing in God as this entity that we have a covenant with, if it's more about community. Because my two daughters who are married, both married non-Jews, both are comfortable with Judaism. One is, probably on the way to conversion. But the point is that I realized there was nothing for me to say, like, you have to do this, because it's too personal. And kind of what he said, finding love, that's the hard part. And no two families, even if they're both Jewish, are alike, as Diane said. And you're combining two different lived experience. So who am I to say which part of your lived experience is the most connecting for you? I don't know. I felt validated in the way he described what my family has lived through. It was very important to me when I got married. But I think my kids grew up in a time where diversity and learning about other people was more important, And when I was in college, most of my friends were Jewish. They didn't even know if their friends were Jewish or not. Like, I'd say, "Oh, is so and so Jewish?" "I don't know." Like, "You don't know? What do you mean you don't know?" That sort of freaked me out. But they grew up in a really different time than I did. So, and I did want to say one thing about Esther's experience. I think some of that is this transition of finding where you fit in and where you belong and what's comfortable for you. So a transition is always going to feel kind of strange. But when you find that place, you're going to be glad there were all these options that you could find exactly your place. I hope.
Lisa?
So I think the topic of marriage, Jewish marriage, is really important because I think there is such a deep human need to be seen and accepted and loved and welcomed. And you want to feel like your place of worship is a place that sees you and recognizes you and accepts you. So, I think Judaism as a whole, and I don't know, he talks about, the way he sees the evolution of marriage within the different streams of Judaism. From my point of view, it's been a pretty rapid change when you look at Esther, from Esther 40, what did you say, 41 years ago to today. 40 years is not a long time. And intermarriage has gone from probably what felt like to Esther pretty taboo back then and maybe not accepted, to today when you hear your friend's child is going out with somebody, you don't even say, are they Jewish? I mean, it's just, like, who are they? Are they in love? Whatever the questions you ask. I mean, it's just gotten to be such a fact of life, intermarriage today. And so I think Reform Judaism has tried to deal with it, but is really having trouble keeping up with the rapidity of it. And I guess what's interesting to me, I'm curious, Rabbi, your take on this. I think, if we consider like our temple maybe to be evolutionary, I don't know if we do, but I'm just saying maybe it seems to me like we're evolutionary in some ways. Maybe we're a little more progressive in other ways. But to me, intermarriage is a fact of modern life. It is a fact. It is a reality. There's nothing that we're going to do to change it. So if it is a fact, then it would seem to me that evolutionary Judaism should adapt the halacha to this fact of modern life. And I don't see that happening. So I'd be curious your take on that, Rabbi.
Joshua, you want to chime in first?
Well, yeah, I was just curious, like, and this is sort of where I get confused. Like, I think our synagogue is very welcoming of people, whoever they're married to or partnered with or married or not married. So the question is, why does halacha need to change? Why would it need to be that you have a Jewishly recognized marriage?
Because
that's the
we
point.
won't marry them. And so I think for some people, if you're not going to marry them, that feels very unwelcoming.
Yeah.
For some
Okay,
people.
so to you, it's the
Maybe
issue
not,
of like where you get married, or can you get married by the religious person that
because
you're
that's the signature welcome that many people are looking for. They can't see past that. For some people, obviously, maybe that's not the issue, but for many people, if you won't marry them, they're not going to feel welcome.
It's also about
Okay.
the children. What will the children be called?
Right.
Right, but I mean I think that's very much a separate halachic lift than recognizing the marriage. Like, if you could say that you're going to marry people with a ketubah who are an interfaith marriage, but that's like what you call the children and whether they're Jewish or not, if the mother's not Jewish, is a totally different question.
Well, but again, we're talking rational versus emotional, and I think Cindy's point and the other points that have been made are so appropriate in terms of the emotion and the feeling surrounding this issue. I am 41 years into this and still have very strong feelings about the fact that I did not get married in a temple. And that I had to go to a reform rabbi who wasn't a working rabbi, Rabbi Grafman at that time. He was a, whatever they are, the
Emeritus.
emeritus, and had to literally buy a house to get married in because I didn't want to get married in a restaurant. So that I would feel somewhat comfortable with my half Jewish wedding, and never really received a ketubah. I don't have a ketubah. That was, no, it's not important functionally. My daughter is Jewish. And my daughter actually married Jewish, which is an accident these days, given our statistics. And so I think that emotional piece is what's difficult to grasp. And no matter how welcoming we are, I think, Lisa brings up a good point. The rules. And what happens, I think, is people go to the Reform synagogue. If it's important to them, they go to the Reform synagogue. And I guess that's where the options come in. I want to say one other thing, because I just want to say, and I'll try to be very quick. I was raised to marry Jewish. I wanted to marry Jewish. I looked to marry Jewish. I was very distressed when I met my now husband and couldn't believe that this was my fate. I couldn't understand it. I was like, how can this be happening to me? How can I be falling in love with an Alan Sheely? Fortunately, I didn't just ignore those feelings. But what I finally understood was important, because, all that we as Jews talk about is marrying Jewish, or at that time, but we never talk about raising our children Jewish. And what I understood was most important was not who I married, but who I was Jewishly. And that I wanted that in my life. And that I was able to be clear with my then whatever he was, soon to be spouse, or eventually to be spouse, that Jewish was important to me, that I couldn't live with a Christmas tree in my house, and that if there were children, they were going to be raised Jewish. These were non-negotiable issues. So to me, what I understood after all those years of being told I needed to marry Jewish was that it wasn't about the marriage. It was really about raising children who wanted to be Jewish and who were happy being Jewish and wanted to continue that, so that no matter who they married, that was something that would be carried on.
Before I respond, Eileen, you had your hand up.
Respond to that. Mine is a little off from
Okay.
that, but
There's a lot of things to respond to, so I'll try to keep it moderately concise as much as a rabbi ever can. First, I do think there's a level where, yes, as Esther and Lisa and I think Cindy all said, like 40 years ago, this was taboo. And it's not as considered as strong of a taboo anymore. I don't remember if I've shared this before or not, with you guys at least. But maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I took part in a class for conservative rabbis on broadly dealing with issues around conservative movement approaches to interfaith couples and marriage, kind of broadly speaking. And at the first session, the moderator said, how many of you have a non-Jewish family member? Out of 52 conservative rabbis on the Zoom call, 50 had at least one non-Jewish family member somewhere in the family. Sometimes it was like a cousin. It was a little further. Sometimes it was, my father divorced and remarried somebody who wasn't Jewish. Sometimes it was a sister or a brother-in-law. But somewhere in their families, 50 out of the 52 had somebody in their family who was in an interfaith relationship, which means this taboo is kind of not much of a taboo anymore, at least in the non-Orthodox world. Orthodox Jews, last statistic I heard, still have something about, I think their interfaith marriage rate is something around 25%, maybe, which is
higher than I thought.
It's significant. It's not low, but when the non-Orthodox world is slightly over 50%, it's significantly higher. So yes, it is a little bit of just modern reality. Now, this is the question he kind of glossed over this question, which um, I think missed a little bit of the point, especially for the evolutionists. Um, the problem is that the halacha is pretty clear on Jewish, non-Jewish marriage. And it's a pretty clear prohibition around it. So changing it is not as easy as just saying, let's change it. Even even if you look at same-sex marriage, that took 20 years of halachic debate and consideration to find a way to do it. And even the way that they came up with is probably not super satisfactory. It's just the best that they could do halachically. Fascinating tshuva, by the way. It just, if I was LGBT, I'm not sure I would find it super satisfying as a response, but it opened the door to what we could do. So I'll kind of run with it, but it's not as easy as just saying let's change the halacha, because halacha shouldn't get changed super easily. Otherwise, you run into what Esther was talking about at the beginning, where everybody's kind of doing whatever they want, and the halacha doesn't actually mean anything because you can just change it and adapt it to whatever you want it to be. So it's not. I'll also say I think the conservative movement has been working for a long time trying to find a solution. They just haven't been able to find a halachic one as of this moment. Um,
Can I ask a really simple question?
sure.
It's quick. Was there any particular reason why you can't have a non-halachic marriage take place in a synagogue? I know there's separate issues with like a rabbi performing one, but like you can essentially do lots of things in a synagogue that don't have anything to do with halacha, right?
I don't know if there's a. I don't know if there's a distinct legal reason why it can't. I think the kind of attitude generally is we are a religious institution who stands for the religious values of the institution, and we're not going to do something that doesn't accord with the religious values of the institution.
Did we not host or allow a couple that was intermarrying to have a Shabbat dinner at our temple in the last couple of years?
We did. Um, we had some conversation around whether or not to do that. Um, but that's not really a halachic issue, and that's not a wedding.
Okay.
It was a
Believe
rehearsal.
me.
It was a rehearsal dinner, not a wedding dinner, not a wedding reception. Um, though that raises another question of once they're already married, can they have the reception? If they do the ceremony somewhere else, can the synagogue host the reception? Nobody's actually asked me that question before, but
No, because
you
it's
could
rude.
you could make that argument as well. Um, Broadly speaking, this is kind of where the conservative movement has landed, and where it is kind of wrestling with this issue. Is there is no halachic way, or at least as of this moment, there is no halachic way to halachically allow and permit interfaith marriages. The Talmud and the legal codes for the last 1500 years are pretty clear against it. Now, that raises two possible solutions, two possible responses to it. One is you say, we're going to permit it anyway, somewhat along what Lisa said. We're going to permit it anyway because this is what everybody's doing, and we want to be welcoming, and we want to allow people here, and we want to let people feel loved and welcomed in our conservative synagogues, and so we're going to permit it. The challenge with doing that is then you lose all standing for any kind of halachic position. Like if you're willing to say we're going to make decisions based on non-halachic reasoning, then you kind of lose any firm grasp of being a halachic movement and holding halakha as a guide to Jewish life. The other option is they continue to prohibit it, in which case they are regularly turning around and ignoring the reality that most couples are getting married in interfaith relationships these days, and that we're effectively turning them around, which, if you look at the research around it, rarely doesn't have a good turnout when you start telling couples no because because I disagree with the fact you're marrying somebody that's not Jewish. And by the way, the research seems to indicate it's worse when the Jewish partner is a man than when it is a woman. Jewish women will figure it out and figure out a way to incorporate Judaism into their family. Jewish men get angry and turn away and want nothing to do with it after. That seems to be obviously not 100%, and that's obviously a broad generalization, but that seems to be the majority of the research seems to be trending in that direction. So, I think there's other political issues as well. As Feldman points out early on in the book, that his breakdowns don't follow denominational lines. So within the conservative movement, there are traditionalists who adamantly are opposed to it, to interfaith marriages, and there are progressives who are adamantly supportive of it. And I think the movement is struggling to balance both sides of that and to keep both sides engaged in the movement. So, it's not as easy as to just say, let's change the halakha. I think there's a lot of other things that are getting woven into the conversation. But I think Joshua brings up an interesting question, which has been raised as well, which is if you don't really care about the recognition of your marriage, then what does it matter whether or not they accept it or not? Like, what's really at stake in the question? Because it's not the Jewishness of the Jewish partner. They're Jewish regardless of who they marry. So what's really at stake? And generally speaking, the answer to that, I think we kind of briefly said, is really the Jewish status of the children of that marriage, which raises a different challenge, which has been raised just without a good solution. I think the solution I was given was, you'll have to figure out an answer to that question yourself. Okay, so what about a 75-year-old widow who falls in love with a 78-year-old widower, and they want to get married? They're not going to be having children. And if one partner's not Jewish, what does it matter? Um, and if what's really at stake is the status of the children, then that's a completely valid question to be asking. Um, Same theoretically, even with a young couple who says, we're not going to have any children. Um, what is it? I think the term they are using is dinks.
What?
Dual income, no kids.
Got it.
I think that's what they started calling themselves, as dinks. Um, so I think maybe that might be really the place of where to start and where to ask the question is what really is the question and what really is the challenge and what's really at stake in this conversation. And maybe from there we can try to come up with a solution, but rather than looking at it as a sociological halachic taboo, what if we did ask the question of what's really at stake and what are we actually arguing about? That might help guide us and lead us to more of a solution than we're currently getting to. Yes, Cindy.
Again, I go back to, yes, you can change those rules if you want to, change the halakha in that way and not with the marriage itself. But there is still so much judgment when a Jew marries a non-Jew. I mean, Esther, I can tell that, you perhaps felt that 40 years ago and, over these years. And I will tell you that I don't think that it's changed that much. So that when there is an intermarriage, there is a lot of blame and guilt thrown around, and which is not helpful for the situation. So, what moves the halakha? Does the halakha move the attitudes, or do the attitudes move the halakha?
Yeah.
And although there seems to be more interfaith marriage, I don't know that a lot of Jews are ready for that change in halakha, nor do they want it.
I do think it's a little bit of a chicken and egg question, but I think the answer to it depends a little bit on your approach to halakha broadly. So, if you're a traditionalist, the answer is nothing really changes the halakha, and that's that. If you're progressive, it's the attitudes adjust the halakha. And that with the more welcoming attitude and with the social situation where it is, then the halakha needs to adjust around it. And if you're evolutionist, you can change the halakha, but you need to do it within the halachic system, and the two need to work together in partnership for that to happen.
I will also add that I am, while the halakha has not changed, I'm proud of our congregation in the ways that it has changed and evolved to be a place that is welcoming to interfaith couples. Because that's something that I know that we have worked very hard for. I would say in the past 10 years or so, and have really done a better job, not a perfect job, but a better job than we had in the past to make those people feel comfortable and seen, like Lisa said.
Eileen, you've been waiting patiently.
Oh, no, that's all right. I came from New Jersey. There was a conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist temple on every corner. And my husband said, we're coming to Birmingham, Alabama. And I was 1 year and I'm leaving. And here it is. I am part of you for 56 years. But I faced a lot of differences along the way because not necessarily it was my husband and I facing them. We had some trauma in the beginning of our marriage here, and we had a stillborn baby. And because my family was in the north, Canner O did the breasts on my second baby. My family in New Jersey being of the, and I don't even know where to put it, I wasn't into that, reconstructionists or wanted to have a pig in a bin. And we were married by an Orthodox rabbi because he was a very close friend of the family. So, of course, my mother immediately called him and he said, no, no, that's not her first baby. So here I am, a married woman, having to face such differences in our religion. And over the years, I've seen that. And friends of mine have said, let me just finish that other story. There was a rabbi in town, he's still here, who said, Eileen, do what's in your heart. Do what's in your heart and what's in your family's heart. So we did a pig in a bin for my son, David. He was the first breathing, living leaven. But I had never felt that way, never been put in that position in New Jersey. And the one thing, and because of my teaching, secular teaching, my activities, I have a lot of non-Jewish friends. And the one thing they always say to me is, all your traditions, even from chicken soup and Canada, all your traditions are so wonderful. And I find now, with all the changes, are we giving up the traditions? That means a lot to me. I agree a little bit with everything everyone said. If we could put it all together, at my age, I'm the grandmother of the group. So, am I going to see that change fully? I hope for my children and my grandchildren. But it's been a process that I've lived with my whole entire life, as have all of you, but really in my heart, the fact that there's so many sects of us. Is that what I want to say? That I don't know, I finally focused. This is my synagogue. You are my rabbi. I have a question. I come to you. Because there's so many different opinions.
And I think part of what Feldman's trying to get us to do is to acknowledge there are lots of different opinions
Mm-hmm.
and not judge other Jews because they hold a different opinion than we do.
Exactly.
And to say, you might hold differently, but, that's okay. We can still love each other as Jews even if we disagree.
Exactly. And that's kind of, what I've learned over all these years as a member of Bethel and as a member of this community.
Yes, Josh.
I was going to say, sort of along those lines, one of my favorite things that I read in the past couple of years was in this sort of peculiar book about halacha, and the rabbi writing it was just remarking how one of the things he missed was that it used to be that essentially your rabbi told you what the tradition was, and that was that. And the problem with all the communication we have now is you find out that there are 25,000 different rabbis who will give you 25,000 different answers. And before then, you had relatively few published books and you had your rabbi. And
Right.
how would you know what any other rabbi said, even 2 villages over?
2 villages.
So
Right.
like I'm a big believer in like whatever Rabbi Henkin tells me is our tradition. And I guess choose to follow it or not, but at least I know what I'm supposed to be doing. And I know that I don't always do what I'm supposed to do about lots of things, but he's my rabbi, so he gets to say what we should be doing.
And hopefully I don't lead you too far astray doing so. But
Well, the
No,
thing is, traditionally, you're just what you say goes, so you can't really lead us astray.
any other closing thoughts, comments? Well, I'm glad we solved the problems and the questions of the world today. Kol hakavod, everyone. Next time, we'll kind of, I think the next chapter will kind of wrap up a lot of these feelings that we're having, and particularly Esther's question about, um, everybody doing whatever they want. So we'll go on to the next chapter. Again, if you have suggestions for what you'd like to learn next, send me an email. I'm going to make a running list of all of the options, and then I'll send them out next week after Thursday, and we'll vote and run off if needed, and we'll make a decision by the following week so we can keep learning after that. Chag Sameach, everyone. Have a good rest of your Sukkot, and I look forward to learning with y'all next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.